Chicago, 1932. The winter hadn't decided whether it wanted to kill you quickly or slowly. On the south side, the streets looked ordinary enough. Bread lines, steam rising from sewer grates, men pretending to be busy so they wouldn't look hungry, women pretending not to hear arguments that spilled into the street. History would later describe this time with numbers, unemployment, crime rates, death tolls. But on that morning, none of that mattered. What mattered was that a child was late enough to take a shortcut, late enough to be in the wrong place, late enough to cross paths with men who already knew how the day would end. Because a few blocks away, a decision had already been made. A meeting was about to go wrong, and when it did, bullets wouldn't care who was supposed to be there. Before we continue, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments. And stay until the end of this story, because what saves a life today isn't always courage. Sometimes it's something small enough to be carried under one arm. The boy didn't know what a line was supposed to look like. He only knew that the men outside the warehouse weren't standing the way adults usually stood. They weren't relaxed. They weren't talking loudly. Their voices stayed low, clipped, like words were expensive. He noticed it without understanding it, the same way you notice dark clouds before you know what rain feels like. He adjusted the book under his arm and kept walking. It was a thin book, but not light. The cover was worn soft, the spine bent from being opened too many times. He liked that about it. It felt owned, real, something that belonged to him in a world that mostly didn't. Across the street, a black Cadillac slowed with traffic. Inside, Al Capone watched the block without turning his head. He didn't need to. He already knew who was where. The car smelled faintly of leather and cold metal. His driver glanced sideways, careful not to stare. 5 minutes, the driver said. Capone didn't answer. He watched the warehouse door, the windows above it. The men posted too close together. That was always a mistake. Too many nerves in one place, too many people trying to prove they weren't afraid. He noticed the child only because the child didn't fit. Capone leaned forward slightly. "Who's the kid?" The driver followed his gaze. "Probably lives nearby." Capone frowned. "Probably shouldn't." The boy stopped near the curb, distracted by the sound of raised voices, not shouting yet, something worse, arguing that wanted to become shouting. He shifted the book, felt it slip, and before he could catch it, it hit the pavement and slid, pages fanning open like it was trying to breathe. He froze. The men didn't notice him, not yet. They were focused on each other, on the deal that had already soured, on the insults that couldn't be taken back. One of them laughed, too loud. Another stepped closer, too fast. Capone's jaw tightened. "Get him out of there," the driver said quietly. Capone shook his head. "Not yet." "Boss." "Not yet." Because moving too early drew attention, and attention was what turned tension into violence. The boy crouched, reaching for the book. His fingers brushed the cover just as a door slammed open. The sound cracked through the street like a warning shot. Everyone looked up. Someone yelled, "Hey!" Someone else said, "What the hell is he doing here?" The boy stood, clutching the book to his chest. He looked around, confused, eyes darting from face to face, trying to understand why the air felt suddenly heavier. Capone opened the car door. The cold hit him first, then the silence. Not complete silence. Chicago never went quiet, but the kind that pulls tight around a moment, waiting to see who will break it. One of the men spotted Capone and stiffened. "Jesus," he muttered. Another whispered, "It's him." Capone stepped onto the street, hands visible, pace unhurried. He wasn't angry. Anger made mistakes. He walked like someone who expected the world to move around him, not against him. The boy saw him now, a big man, dark coat, hat pulled low. He took a step back instinctively, gripping the book tighter.
Capone stopped a few feet away and looked down at him. "How old are you?" he asked. The boy swallowed. "I don't know." Capone nodded, like that answer made sense. "You got a name?" The boy hesitated, then shook his head. Behind them, the men shifted. Someone reached into a coat pocket. Someone else noticed and tensed. Capone didn't turn around. "You lost?" The boy glanced at the book, then back up. "I was just going home." Capone looked at the warehouse, at the men, at the way their hands hovered too close to their jackets. Home wasn't going to happen today. "Stay close," Capone said, not a command, a suggestion that felt heavier than one. The boy nodded, not because he trusted him, but because every other option felt worse. And somewhere behind them, a voice cracked. "Enough talking." The first gun was pulled, and that was when everything changed.
The first gun didn't fire right away. That was the most dangerous moment. Men who planned violence rarely rushed it. They waited for the right excuse, the right insult, the right misunderstanding. On that street, excuses were everywhere. A look held too long, a hand moving too close to a coat pocket, the presence of the wrong man at the wrong time. Capone felt it shift before it happened. The air tightened. The crowd leaned back, instinctively creating space, like the street itself wanted distance from what was coming. "Kid," Capone said quietly, not turning his head, "you hear loud noises, you don't run." The boy looked up at him, confused. "Then what?" "You listen," Capone said, "and you move when I tell you." Behind them, a voice rose. "You think bringing him here scares us?" Another answered, sharper. "You think you're in charge today?" Capone finally turned. His eyes were steady, unimpressed. "I think you're all nervous," he said, "and nervous men make stupid decisions." A man near the warehouse spat on the ground. "You here to lecture us?" Capone smiled faintly. "No. I'm here to stop you from doing something you can't undo." The boy tightened his grip on the book. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. Grown-ups talked like that right before things went bad. He shifted his weight, the book slipping again under his arm, and Capone felt it immediately. "Hold on to that," Capone said. "I am," the boy replied, defensive. A laugh cut through the tension, too loud, too forced. "You hear that? He's giving advice now." Capone took a step sideways, positioning himself slightly between the boy and the group. Not shielding, not yet, just enough to block a direct line. "This doesn't concern you," one of the men said. Capone's voice dropped to a whisper. "That kid makes it concern me." Another man hissed, "You're going to start a war over a street rat?" Capone looked back at the boy. Thin coat, red fingers from the cold, the book pressed tight to his chest like armor. "Over a witness," Capone corrected, "and over time, which you're running out of." The crowd murmured. Someone whispered, "He's right." Another whispered back, "Shut up." The boy's foot slid on a patch of ice. The book fell. This time, it didn't just slip. It skidded across the pavement, stopping closer to the warehouse door than it should have. The boy froze. "My book," he said, not loud, not dramatic, just stating a fact that suddenly felt huge. Capone's jaw tightened. He scanned the street. Hands were moving now, coats shifting, a decision being made without words. "No," Capone said immediately. "Leave it." The boy shook his head. "I can't." Capone turned fully toward him now. "You can, you will." The boy swallowed hard. "It's mine." Behind them, a man barked, "Enough!" and another hand came out of a coat holding metal. Capone's voice dropped to a whisper. "We don't have time." The boy didn't move. "My mom gave it to me. She said don't lose it."
That landed harder than a shout. Capone stared at him for half a second too long. In that pause, the street crossed a line it couldn't uncross. A gun was raised. Someone screamed, and Capone made a choice.
"Stay here," Capone said. The boy opened his mouth to argue, but Capone was already moving, fast now, purposeful. He crossed the distance to the book in long strides, ignoring the shouting, ignoring the way men were repositioning around him. "Capone!" someone yelled. "Don't be stupid!" Capone bent, scooped the book up, pages fluttering in the wind. It was heavier than he expected. Not thick, just dense with use. He turned back. The first shot cracked the air. People scattered. The crowd that had watched in silence moments before dissolved into motion, bodies colliding, shoes slipping, voices overlapping in panic. Another shot followed, then another, the sound bouncing off brick and glass. Capone grabbed the boy's shoulder. "Eyes on me," he said, "not them." The boy's breath came fast. "You said it was safe." "It was," Capone replied, pulling him forward, "until it wasn't." They moved together, Capone guiding him through the chaos, one hand firm, the other gripping the book. He shoved the book into the boy's arms. "Hold this." The boy clutched it instinctively. A man lunged from the side. Capone shoved the boy hard toward an open doorway. "Run!" The boy stumbled, caught himself, turned back, and the world exploded in noise. Capone felt the impact before he heard it. A punch, a heat, then pressure. He staggered, teeth clenched, refusing to fall where he stood. The book slipped from the boy's hands and hit the ground again, pages tearing as a body fell against it. Capone hit the pavement a heartbeat later. The street screamed. Men scattered, guns vanished, the fight evaporated as quickly as it had begun, leaving only the echo of shots and the sound of breathing too loud in the cold. The boy stood frozen in the doorway, eyes wide, chest heaving. He looked at Capone on the ground, blood dark against the coat. "Hey," Capone said, voice strained but steady. "You're still standing. That's good." The boy didn't move. Capone coughed, then pointed weakly. "Go. Your coat." Capone almost laughed. "Kid," he said, "if you don't leave right now, this all gets worse." A man grabbed the boy from behind and pulled him back inside. The door slammed. Capone lay still, staring up at the gray sky, breath shallow but present. He could feel it now, the pain, sharp and spreading, but also something else. He was alive, and he didn't know why.
The ceiling above him was the wrong color. That was the first thing Al Capone noticed when consciousness returned. Not pain, not fear, not the voices. The ceiling was too white, too clean. It didn't belong to a man who'd just been bleeding out on a Chicago street. It belonged to a place where things were supposed to make sense. He tried to move his hand. A sharp protest flared through his side, hot and immediate, and he stopped himself with a slow breath. The pain wasn't blinding. That worried him more than if it had been. Pain you could manage. Absence of it meant your body was deciding whether to keep you. "Easy," a voice said. Capone turned his head. The room swam briefly, then settled. A nurse stood near the bed, older, efficient, eyes already cataloging his movements. "Where am I?" he asked. "Cook County Hospital. You've been in and out." "How long?" She checked the clock without really looking at it. "Long enough for everyone who cares to know you're not dead." Capone closed his eyes for a moment. Not dead. That felt incomplete. "Doctor will be in soon," the nurse added. "Try not to move." He opened his eyes again. "I don't try, I succeed." She almost smiled, almost. Footsteps approached, heavier than the nurse's, measured. A man in a white coat entered, flipping through a chart like the paper mattered more than the body attached to it. He stopped at the foot of the bed and looked up. "You're fortunate," the doctor said. Capone studied him. "That's not a word people usually use with me." The doctor shrugged. "Today it fits." "What happened?" Capone asked.
And don't give me the short version." The doctor considered him, then sighed. "You took a round that should have done a lot more damage than it did. Entry angle wasn't great. Velocity was reduced." Capone frowned. "Reduced by what?" The doctor hesitated. That hesitation mattered. "By something you were holding," he said finally. Capone turned his head slowly. "Holding what?" The doctor stepped aside and nodded toward a small metal tray on a nearby table. On it lay a book, or what was left of one. The cover was torn, the edges chewed up by impact. Pages were shredded through the middle, paper browned with blood and grime, a neat, ugly hole punched through its heart. Capone stared at it. "That slowed the bullet enough," the doctor said, tapping the chart, "to keep it from reaching anything vital." Capone didn't answer. He kept looking at the book. "How—" the doctor stopped himself. "How did you come to be holding that?" Capone's mouth opened, then closed. He searched for the memory like it was buried under rubble. The street, the noise, the boy, the book skidding across concrete. My book," the kid had said. Capone swallowed. His throat felt dry. "Did that belong to a child?" "Yes, a boy. Police brought it in with you." Capone's voice was quiet. "Is he alive?" The doctor nodded. "Unharmed." Capone leaned back into the pillow, a breath leaving him that he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Lucky," the doctor repeated, as if the word might stick better the second time. Capone looked back at the book. "No," he said, "prepared." The doctor raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For making the right mistake." The doctor didn't ask what that meant. After he left, the room felt smaller. The beeping of a machine somewhere near his head kept time, steady and irritating. Capone shifted his gaze from the ceiling to the book again. He hadn't meant to keep it. That was the strange part. When he'd bent to pick it up, his mind was on the street, on timing, on angles, on getting the kid out. The book was an obstacle at first, something in the way, and then something else.
He could still hear the boy's voice. "It's mine." Not, "It's important." Not, "It's special." Mine. Capone turned his head as the door opened again. This time it wasn't a doctor. One of his men stepped in, hat in hand, eyes alert, scanning the room before settling on Capone. "Boss," he said quietly, "good to see you breathing." Capone watched him. "Who's asking?" The man hesitated. "Everyone." Capone snorted, then winced. "Figures." He nodded toward the book. "You see that?" The man followed his gaze. "Yes, sir." "You know where it came from?" The man nodded again. "Kid on the street." Capone's eyes sharpened. "You make sure that kid gets home?" "Yes." "How?" The man shifted his weight. "He was taken in by a woman on the next block. Knows his family." Capone closed his eyes briefly. "Good." The man cleared his throat. "There's more. Always is. The kid's place, it's not good." Capone opened his eyes. "Explain." "Father's gone. Mother works nights. Boy mostly fends for himself." Capone was quiet for a long moment. The machine beeped. Somewhere down the hall, someone coughed. "Does he read?" Capone asked. The man blinked. "Sir?" "The kid," Capone said. "Does he read?" "Yes," the man replied. "A lot, from what we could tell." Capone nodded. Then that book mattered. The man hesitated again. "Boss, you want us to—" "No," Capone said sharply. "You don't touch the family." The man held up a hand. "I didn't mean like that." Capone looked at him. "Then mean something else." The man took a breath. "You want us to help." Capone stared at the ceiling again. "I want the kid safe, quietly. No names, no favors owed." The man frowned. "That's unusual." "So was surviving today," Capone said. The man nodded once. "We'll handle it." "Carefully," Capone added. "No lessons, no speeches." "Yes, sir."
The man turned to leave, then paused. "Boss?" Capone looked at him. "That book," the man said. "You want it thrown out?" Capone's answer was immediate. "No." The man waited. "You get it fixed," Capone continued, "if it can be. And if it can't, we get him another," the man said. "No, you get him the same one." The man frowned. "It's damaged. So am I. Still works." The door closed softly behind him. Capone lay still, listening to the rhythm of the room. The pain was worse now, creeping in like it had been waiting its turn. He welcomed it. Pain meant presence. He reached for the book with his good hand. The cover felt rough, torn fibers catching on his fingers. He opened it carefully, the pages resisting, then giving way. A sentence caught his eye, half destroyed by the bullet's path. He read it twice. Then he closed the book and stared at the wall. He thought about the men on the street, the ones who'd watched, the ones who'd run, the ones who'd fired. He thought about the kid standing there, refusing to move, anchored to something that wasn't flesh or fear. A knock came at the door. "Yes," Capone said. A woman stepped in, middle-aged, coat worn but clean, eyes tired in a way that came from responsibility, not age. She held her hat in both hands, like she didn't know where else to put it. "They told me I could see you," she said. Capone studied her. "Who are you?" "My name's Anna," she replied. "I was there." Capone said, "The street." She nodded. "I took the boy inside when the shooting started." Capone watched her closely. "You didn't have to." She met his gaze. "No, but I did." Silence stretched. "How is he?" she asked. Capone nodded. "He's fine." She let out a breath. "Good." She glanced at the book on the bed. "That's his." "I know." She hesitated, then said, "He keeps asking about you." Capone raised an eyebrow. "That's a mistake." "He doesn't know who you are," she said quickly, "just that you told him to run." Capone considered that. "Good." She took a step closer. "He wanted you to tell you something." Capone waited. "He said he's sorry about your coat." Capone laughed before he could stop himself. It turned into a cough, sharp and painful, but the sound lingered in the room after it passed. "Tell him that coats can be replaced," Capone said. Anna nodded. Then she looked at him differently, not afraid, not grateful, just honest. "You didn't have to do that," she said. Capone met her gaze. "I know." "Then why?" she began. "Because," Capone interrupted, "because sometimes you're standing in the wrong place long enough that it becomes the right one." Anna absorbed that. Then she nodded once. "I'll tell him you're alive." Capone nodded back. "Tell him to keep reading." She smiled faintly. "I will." When she left, Capone closed his eyes again. The image of the street replayed in fragments, the book skidding, the kid's voice, the sudden weight in his hand. He hadn't planned to be a hero. He hadn't planned at all. And yet, here he was, alive, because of a book that wasn't his.
The city didn't care that he had survived. Chicago moved the way it always moved, hungry and impatient, swallowing news and spitting it out as rumor. People would hear Capone got hit, and they'd nod like it was inevitable, like the world had simply corrected itself. Then they'd go back to their business. Some men in back rooms smiled at the thought that blood had finally found him. Others tensed because a wounded animal was more dangerous than a healthy one. But none of them understood the strangest part. It wasn't the bullet. It was what stopped it. Capone lay in the hospital another day, then two. Each hour people visited, lawyers, men who talked too softly, men who tried too hard to look calm. They asked questions that weren't really questions. Who fired first? Was it a setup? Do we respond? Capone answered as little as possible.
He didn't enjoy being questioned while he was weak, and he didn't enjoy how the story was already trying to become something else, a headline, a warning, a rallying cry. He wanted none of that. He wanted the boy safe, and he wanted the book back in the boy's hands. The third day his man returned, same hat in hand, same careful eyes. "We found his mother," the man said. "Name's Maria, works nights. She came by the woman's place, crying, wouldn't stop thanking everyone." Capone stared at the ceiling. "Tell her to stop thanking." The man hesitated. "She doesn't know it was you." Capone's voice stayed flat. "Good. She said the book came from a church giveaway, only one he ever got. That's why he wouldn't leave it." Capone's jaw tightened slightly, not with anger, but with something sharper, recognition. The kind of recognition that happens when you remember what it's like to want something small because the world never offers you anything big. "He keep asking about me?" Capone asked. The man nodded. "He keeps asking if you're mad at him." Capone exhaled slowly. "Mad?" "No," Capone said. "Tell him—" He stopped, as if the words were harder than the pain. "Tell him he did good." The man blinked. "He did good?" Capone looked at him now. He held on to something that mattered. Most men don't. The man nodded, uncomfortable, like he wasn't sure how to store that sentence in his brain. "We can bring him here," he said carefully, "just for a minute if you want." Capone's eyes narrowed. "You want that kid walking through this hospital with my name attached to him?" The man quickly shook his head. "No, boss, of course not." "Exactly," Capone said. "He stays away." The man glanced at the damaged book on the tray. "We can't fix it," he admitted. "Pages are torn all through, hole straight through the center, but we can bind it, keep it together." Capone stared at the book, then spoke quietly. "Bind it." The man nodded. "Anything else?" Capone's fingers tapped the sheet once, a small nervous habit he would never admit to. "Yes," he said. "Find out what he likes." The man frowned. "Likes?" "Food, books, anything, I don't care." The man waited, uncertain. Capone's voice hardened. "And don't make it obvious. Don't give him a pile of money. That's not help. That's a target." The man nodded quickly. "Understood." Capone closed his eyes. "Good." When the man left, Capone listened to the hospital again. Distant footsteps, a muted argument in a hallway, the sound of a cart rolling past. And in that noise, he realized something that bothered him more than the bullet. On that street, when the first gun was pulled, half those men had been ready to shoot each other for pride, for territory, for a look that lasted too long. But none of them had seen the child. Not really. They saw him the way they saw garbage on the sidewalk, something you step around, something you pretend isn't there so you don't have to think about why it's there. Capone had lived his whole life in that kind of pretending. He'd just gotten better at it than most. And then a kid said, "It's mine," like that word meant more than fear. It shouldn't have worked, and yet it had, because that's what broke him open for a second. Not compassion as an idea, but as a reflex he didn't enjoy admitting he had. 2 days later, Capone left the hospital under heavy cover, not because he was afraid of another shot, but because vulnerability changed the math of every room you walked into. Men respected power. They smelled weakness. His driver pulled the car to the curb. "Where to, boss?" Capone stared out the window at the city. The streets looked exactly the same as always, which made him angry in a quiet way, because something in him wasn't the same. "Drive," Capone said. "Where?" Capone paused. "Near the church." The driver's eyes flickered in the mirror. "Which one?" "The one with the bread line," Capone replied. The car moved. They arrived before the line had fully formed. A few men stood in coats too thin, hands tucked deep in pockets, trying to look like they weren't waiting. A priest stood by the door, speaking softly to someone, his breath fogging in the air. Capone stepped out. The street noticed instantly. It always did. A man muttered, "Jesus," under his breath. Another stepped back. Someone crossed themselves like they'd just seen a ghost. Capone walked toward the door as if the reaction didn't exist. The priest looked up, and for a moment his face tightened. Fear or caution, hard to tell, but he didn't run. He waited, as if he learned long ago that running wasn't always the safest choice. Capone stopped a few feet away. "Father," Capone said. The priest didn't pretend not to know him. That impressed Capone. "Mr. Capone," the priest replied, "I wasn't expecting you." Capone nodded. "That makes two of us." The priest glanced at the men nearby, then back to Capone. "What do you want?" Capone's mouth tightened. He didn't like that question, not because it was rude, but because it was honest. He could have lied. He could have said he wanted to donate, wanted to help, wanted redemption. He could have put on a performance.
Chicago didn't change after the shooting. The street was cleaned, the rumors moved on, and by the next morning, the city had already decided what mattered and what didn't. Al Capone left the hospital quietly. No speeches, no statements, just a bandage under his coat and a scar he didn't talk about. The boy never saw him again. But a week later, a repaired book appeared on a kitchen table, the same one, torn pages stitched back together. On the inside cover, a short message written in careful ink. "Keep reading." Nothing else. No name, no explanation. Years later, when the boy tried to remember the man from the street, he couldn't recall the face clearly, only the voice, calm, certain, the kind of voice that didn't promise safety, only direction. Al Capone went back to being Al Capone. The city kept fearing him, the papers kept printing his name, and the streets stayed just as dangerous as before. But somewhere in Chicago, a child didn't die that day. Not because of a gun, not because of power, but because someone stopped long enough to pick up a book that wasn't his. And sometimes, that's all it takes to change a life.